The world is going through changes happening at a speed that we have never seen before. This is leading to disruption, chaos, panic, fear, hysteria, and a turbulent economy and marketplace. How do you protect your wealth in a turbulent world? How do you invest for cash flow in alternative assets to escape the rat race in times of uncertainty? How do you decentralize yourself, family, your community, your business, and your investments to become sovereign and escape the matrix? If you are looking for strategies, tactics, and techniques to escape the rat race and matrix, you are in the right place. My name is MC Lobsher, and this is Cashflow Ninja. This is Cashflow Ninja. I'm MC Lobsher. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode and spending your most valuable resource, your time, once again with me. Everything Cashflow Ninja is at cashflowninja.com. We have podcasts, books, reports, and much, much more. And don't forget to subscribe to the #1 weekly newsletter in the alternative wealth strategy and alternative asset investing space, The Wealth Dojo. You can subscribe at cashflowninja.com/subscribe. I've got a fantastic show for you today. I'm joined by Michael Frew. Michael, it's great to see you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me on here.
Michael, so for the people that are not familiar with you and what you do, could you please share a little bit about your background and your journey and what you're up to these days?
Absolutely, yes. So I'm an ex-engineer, ex-software developer. Did that for about 18, 19 years in the corporate world, did consulting, all of that, something probably familiar to a lot of your audience, and was really looking for how do I make that entrepreneurial move to running my own business. And I think the unique path that I found after many failed trials was, instead of trying to start something myself, I stumbled on online brokers, which are taking businesses that other entrepreneurs have started and they want to move on to start their next business, or they've got too many things going on. And I acquire those businesses or those projects. And it turned out I had to kind of get comfortable with the fact that I'm not probably the best entrepreneur to go from 0 to 1 with a new idea, but I'm actually very good at being an operator to go from 1 to 10. And that's when I look back and reflect on my consulting career, that's what I was always doing. You know, a lot of consulting is a company builds a product to about 80% done, then they parachute you in there and you're supposed to miracle it all the way to 100%. So you're always kind of fighting fires. And that turned out to be a really good kind of staging area to acquire businesses that are already moving, already have cash flow, already have customers, already have marketing, and take it forward. So that's the career path I've been on for the last 10 years, and really just out here to try and kind of highlight that as a possible pivoting for engineers, developers, other IT professionals.
Michael, I really appreciate you sharing that. And one of the things that stood out to me is that you were very self-reflective. You understood what your strengths are, what your skill sets, your capabilities, your your mindset, you know what that is, and you figured out a way to insert yourself in the spot in this business ecosystem that gives you the best opportunity to succeed. So everybody knows that starting a business is really, really hard. It requires a different set of skill sets, capabilities, and a mindset just to get a business off the ground and get it from 0 to 1 million. But then if you're trying to get it from 1 million to 10 million, it requires a completely different set of skills, capabilities, and a different mindset. So that's the one thing that really stood out to me. What you just shared is that you figured out what you're good at, and you figured out, okay, how can I insert myself in this space to give myself the best opportunity to succeed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're right. We could both go through the statistics of how hard it is to be successful with something that you're standing up from fresh. I think like a lot of your listeners, I've got an archive of projects that I've tried to get started. I've probably got 100 domains that I thought were going to be a business that are just sitting in my GoDaddy account. We've all kind of gone through that. So it is an interesting way to approach it, where maybe that original idea isn't as important to you and you just really enjoy working with like a certain customer set or a certain niche.
Now you're focusing mostly on online businesses, right? Or Are there some brick and mortar businesses, or is there a little bit of a mix of both?
So far, I'm all online. That seems to be where my expertise is. I'm kind of leveraging the career that I had in corporate America beforehand. That doesn't mean I won't be looking at offline in the future as a way to diversify. So a lot of what's nice about online business is you can strip away a lot of things that make acquisitions in the brick and mortar world more difficult. Typically, there's not any buildings. There's not really like real estate. You're getting a lot more profit per head count, so you're not usually dealing with a lot of people. So it makes the acquisition education process a little bit faster. And there's less things that we all have to do in the due diligence phase. So it's a really nice on-ramp, even if you're looking at acquisitions in the real world, and you might like to start acquiring some of the baby boomer businesses that are coming up for sale. This is not a bad way to learn the process, to kind of get your first reps in there before you move on to something else.
Online businesses, of course, are very, very scalable, especially the ones that were built correctly, right? Where you don't have to break down the entire infrastructure and systems and processes. So I'm referring to the ones that are actually built to scale, so you can just acquire them and really notch it up and scale the business, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's obviously not a big secret, but if you can find a business that really doesn't have an increase in, let's say, if you add 1,000 customers, do I need to add a new customer service rep? If you can get a business where the scalability doesn't add more headcount, that's like you're saying, that's where it's really a great business model. And so many things with software and infrastructure and things like that can scale without adding more members. And if you can find one of those, that's just a perfect opportunity.
Michael, so can you please share your 8-step framework for finding, financing, and acquiring these online businesses?
I think a lot of your listeners will recognize much of it is very similar to real estate. You're basically starting with, what is my specialty going to be? And when you're looking at acquiring real estate, are you going to be doing single family homes, going to be multifamily? So really you're looking at your background. What would you do well? What would you like to do? What gets you out of bed every morning? What type of customers would you want to talk to? So really that first couple steps, it's all about mindset. And then the next question that most people are going to have is usually the next step, which is how am I going to finance this? And when I started 10 years ago in this was not a very mature industry. There wasn't a lot of financing available. Now, as we're speaking in the middle of 2024, there are companies that are lending money for online acquisitions. The SBA has actually gotten involved, and they are now approving loans for online businesses that don't even have any physical assets. I feel like in the US, that's a huge step. So we kind of work a little bit on the financing part. And then it's really, how do you find businesses? What do you talk with sellers? How do you present offers? How do you deal with, let's say, competitive bids where maybe multiple buyers are trying to buy a really good business? What that due diligence process is going to be like, what the closing process is going to be like, and what that transition is going to be like. So each of those is kind of a separate step. Again, much like real estate, some of them are a little bit longer, and some of them it's, the closing is going to be typically one day, and you roll right into transition, which could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 or 4 months.
So when you look at online businesses, there are so many different options, right? You can have products, physical products or information products, and then services, right? You can have consulting, online consulting, and then you would have have to obviously have a consulting team. You would have to have obviously salespeople involved in that whole process. You can have boutique consulting as a service, all being an online business. So there's a lot of different options. So you probably have to figure that out, right?
Each one of those is a good niche, yeah. And so people that are specialty in that, right? If you're really good at selling information products, there are those that come up for sale. And I've seen colleagues of mine just take those and run with it. So it's really fantastic that there are so many different niches that you can go out and acquire those assets to run forward.
So once someone's figured out the niche that they want to buy a business in, the 3 big niches come to mind: health, relationships, and money. 3 very, very big niches. So let's just say health, right? They've determined, okay, I want to buy a business in the health space. And they've also then figured out what type of business in the health space they want. Maybe there's information products and group coaching and online training, or there's more of a physical product like a supplement with also some info products. So they have the niche down. They figured out what type of business they want to buy. What does the process then look like? How do you know if a deal is a good deal? Are there any multiples based on sales that people should be looking at? How do you know if the business that is listed at the correct price and if it's a good deal or not?
Great question. And it is one of the first things that people always ask, especially if you're not familiar with the space. So each type of niche, let's say the difference between maybe e-commerce versus a content site versus a SaaS software business, those are all going to have different profit multiples. So at the size of businesses that we're talking about here, which you can say is probably under $5 million, when you start getting over 5 million, you start getting a little bit of private equity start touching in there. And I try and stay underneath that because that's a whole different animal. That's who I'm actually looking to sell to once I've grown the business. So at under 5 million, yeah, you're looking at different niches, and each niche is going to have a different multiple. Software, you've got recurring revenue, it's going to have higher multiples. Content, especially with ChatGPT coming out, there's a lot of unknowns about how content sites are going to go moving forward. Those multiples have slowed down or even kind of come to a halt while everyone's trying to figure things out. So the multiples you kind of need to know and get your financial literacy around that. You then have to have a pretty good understanding of what it really takes to run an online business. So you'll get typically from a broker or a marketplace, what is the revenue, which is usually pretty easy to confirm. And then you've got expenses. And as you know, when people are dealing with small business, a lot of times people are running personal expenses through there. They're doing things to lower the tax burden. So you have to be able to rebuild all of that to understand how you're going to run it, what it's going to cost you. And you can say, all right, this profit amount times the multiple for that market, that's where I'm looking to acquire at around that price. Is that anywhere near where the seller's looking for? And can we make up that difference somehow? So that's just kind of like the broad outline of how I would look at a business, taking the profit, taking the multiple in the industry, and moving forward to try and get an offer that both sides can agree on.
And then you can obviously start looking at financing options, right? And you should probably explore that even before you make an offer. What are you seeing right now in the space? You'd mentioned that the SBA is looking to get into the game of online businesses, not just your bricks and mortar businesses. And obviously there's a ton of seller financing options. What's going on with regards to financing options for prospective buyers in this space right now?
Yeah, you've hit them all right there. Seller financing is fairly common, especially because a lot of these businesses are going to have a pretty significant knowledge transfer, and you want the seller to have a little bit of skin in the game maybe for the next year. So some of the changes that we've seen, again, mid-2024, so we've just gone through a pretty high interest rate increase over the last 2 years. That has actually changed the landscape quite a bit. And one of the acquisitions I did at the beginning of 2022, I couldn't even put together today because the way we structured it doesn't work with interest rates where they are today. So that is something you do need to pay attention to a little bit on the outside world of how that's going to affect your financing. If you're coming in with cash today, you're in a much better spot than when we were a couple of years ago when there was so much cash out there it almost didn't matter. And you asked about bringing cash to the acquisition. Sometimes you can get away with maybe 20%, and then you maybe look at like 20% seller financing and then looking at other ways to layer up the rest of the business. But you're almost always going to have to bring your own money. So if you're thinking about this as a 5 to 10 year thing down your career path, let's say you're in your mid-20s, you're thinking maybe in a year or maybe in 5 years, I'd like to kind of exit the corporate world. That's where you'd maybe start saving a little money on the side. And that can help with just that down payment. So if you're working with a broker, they're going to want to qualify you as a qualified buyer. And having some of that cash to show, I can be in this conversation. Let's talk with the seller. Again, very reminiscent of how real estate works in the United States. It's a very similar process. And I think a lot of people that understand how real estate acquisitions go would really feel comfortable in this as well.
So after you've closed on the business, What does it look like? What does the transition look like? What happens next?
Yeah. So the transition, well, the closing process is pretty fast. We're kind of moving money on that last day. And that first day, what you really want to do is set up, let's get the bank accounts in the right names. Let's get the ownership in the right names. Maybe if it's a domain name, getting that correctly done. And a lot of times I'll say, like that's enough for one day. It's enough risk. One of those things might mess up, as you wait for banks and Stripe and PayPal to digest that this is happening. In the past 10 years, it has gotten better, but there were a lot of businesses were not very comfortable changing ownership. It wasn't something they expected their customers to do. And I remember in the past, like changing Amazon stores was actually not legal. And so people kind of had to get around that a little bit, but I think it's better now. So I usually say, like, let's just do that on the first day. After that, you probably have a 30 to 60 day transition. You're working with the seller. And the seller's probably going to be working that first day almost as normal because I'm trying to learn, how does the customer service thing work? Who's the team? Do we have to introduce us to somebody? And so it's just that knowledge transfer process, writing a lot of things down, getting everybody talking. And your goal is you don't, at least for me personally, I don't want the customers to notice that there was an ownership change. If they notice a big moment, that means, this wasn't as smooth as I expected. So whether we want to make an announcement or not, I really want that transition where the customer was having a really good customer service conversation the day before. I want to make sure it's good the day after. So I would typically budget 30 to 90 days for a kind of a software business transition, and then staying in touch with the seller over those next few quarters, because there are questions that come up just once every quarter. Or you get a customer that hasn't written in 9 months, and they refer to the old person that they knew from day one, and you want to get their input as well. So for the seller, it's a slow process of moving yourself out of the business, so then you can move on to the next thing.
Can you, during the negotiation of the contract, negotiate that the seller can stay on as a consultant for a fee for the next 30 to 60 to 90 days to ensure this smooth transition?
Yes, some sellers will, usually you'll have, all right, there's at least 30 days that's baked in, no extra compensation for that. Some instances, sellers do enjoy still staying on maybe as a contractor, doing some help. And I've seen that situation where you say, okay, it's going to be $85 an hour. We'll reach out when we have like more of the higher level architecture questions, and you'd be fantastic for this. So you're right. You can really, and you're right. You write all of that into the asset purchase agreement and what that transition plan is going to be. It's definitely not something you try and figure out afterwards.
How do you achieve clarity, certainty, and predictability in a world, economy, and markets that are volatile and chaotic? How do you have confidence in an environment where change and disruption is constant? Setting up infinite banking is how you establish certainty in an uncertain world, predictability in an unpredictable world. With an infinite banking policy, you have your capital warehoused outside of the Wall Street casino, where it is guaranteed never to go down in value and guaranteed to grow tax-free. You have guaranteed access to your capital, and you also will be able to access your capital tax-free to use to capitalize on opportunities as you come across them. Creating your own banking system with infinite banking can be your secret weapon to protect and grow wealth during turbulent times. You can watch a presentation and explore infinite banking options for you and your family at yourownbankingsystem.com. That's yourownbankingsystem.com. Can you share more about building out a portfolio of businesses? Here's a thought that I had. If I was building out a portfolio of businesses, I'd probably be buying businesses with the similar customer or client, but just try to service them throughout the different stages of the customer journey. That's one idea. And then the other idea that I had is having businesses in the same niche that I would buy that could cross-sell to the other businesses. Could you please share a little bit more how you would build out a portfolio of businesses?
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right. The way I do it is my businesses actually look very different on the outside front end, but on the back end, it's the same tech stack. So I've got the same engineers working on three or four different businesses, all because it's the same tech stack. So it's always an interesting question when a business comes out. I don't really, look too much at what it's doing on the front end. What is underneath the hood? So that's how I kind of make everything very similar. That does take a little bit away from the cross-selling because even though the tech stack's same, it may be a completely different customer base. The other thing I try and do is I really enjoy talking and working with engineers and developers, basically solving my own problems. So all my businesses, same tech stack, customer is usually going to be a developer or an engineering team. So there we're all doing the same thing. We're all having kind of the same conversation with the same people. We have the same background, same experience. And that you can kind of do a little cross-sell as well. But that I think is exactly like you're saying, where it's not like I'm getting an Amazon business over here and then I'm running an advertising site over there. That all of a sudden becomes three separate portfolios in a way, right? And it really is going to start eating into your time. So the more you can find things and be in that same space, for example, why not become the WordPress themes person, right? And you just go out every time somebody sells WordPress themes, you're in there to acquire those. That's another way people can build a portfolio around a certain piece of a niche. And so it's super helpful, I think, as the operator to be able to do it that way, just like you suggested.
What do some of the returns look like in online businesses?
Yeah, it is a different world in returns. And if I compare it to stocks or real estate, the other ways that people build wealth, the returns are much higher. Now, the reason for that is there's more risk, right? I don't have an asset. If everything goes down, there's no building or land to sell. Typically, most stocks will actually still have some book value. These are a little bit different. You might have some intellectual property, but I highly doubt it's going to be anywhere near what you paid for. So that's why the returns and the multiples are lower. So the returns are higher, the multiples are lower than you would see for other more established businesses. So you kind of weigh the pros and cons of that. And one approach that I see a lot of people do is we're doing this with the higher return, higher risk as our cash flow process. We then take some of that cash flow to acquire the next business, and some of that cash flow we put into more stable assets like real estate, like equities, like bonds. And so we're using this as the way to create the wealth, but then we're not kind of growing it in the same way.
Now, we might have some listeners and viewers that have an online business. They're thinking of selling that business and they're crushing it in that business. The business is doing really, really well. But most people, when they explore selling their business, especially an online business and brick and mortar businesses, even though it's doing really, really well, it's not really sellable because it's not built to sell. What advice would you give to those business owners that have an online business or even a brick and mortar business and they're looking to sell it, to position or to rebuild their businesses so that it is sellable?
Fantastic question, because over time I've realized I'm actually a much better consultant for people trying to sell their businesses because I'm looking at the other side and I'm the other party. Top things are, one thing you're seeing a lot because of the rate changes, and venture capital firms are no longer funding a lot of these startups that came out of like Y Combinator. They overhired, had great growth for a minute, but now that they're out of money, they're trying to create profit. And I always say, I'm not looking for businesses like that. If you're doing hockey stick growth or you're shooting for the moon, buyers aren't really as interested in that because we can't recreate it in the future. We're looking for cash flow in the future. That's something that I can rely on. If you have a boring business that just grows a little bit each month or each year, I'm much happier about that. So controlling that growth might be better than trying to do kind of the hockey stick growth. The next thing I really look for is high profit per head count. Going back to our earlier conversation, not really looking for something where every 5 new customers I have to bring on another person. That really hurts on margins. We're looking for scalable businesses. And so if you can do that, that is incredibly helpful if you're trying to sell the business. And finally, and I think you're probably implying this, a lot of these businesses, the finances are not run very well. They're maybe just done on Excel, if they're done at all. And it takes a lot of time to clean that up for an acquirer to understand what's going on. So if you're looking at selling a business in the next 6 to 12 months, it's not the worst idea even to talk to a broker, because they will tell you, here's 5 things I would change about your business over the next 12 months, and it'll double the value of your business, and it won't hurt anything. Plus, you'll make more money. Because we look at things very differently as an acquirer than you do as an operator. So those are kind of a few of the things. I can give one piece of advice as well. As an acquirer, we don't like annual plans. Whereas a SaaS operator, they always tell you, do annual plans, 20% off, get the money up front. Those are less reliable recurring revenue streams for an acquirer. So the first thing I always tell people is stop selling annual plans and never ever sell lifetime plans. If you think about a lifetime plan, you took all of the benefit and the buyer gets all of the liability. So lifetime plans are really rough for buyers. So I always say, don't do the product hunt thing. Don't sell lifetime plans. Cut back on your annual plans. And that really just sets you up better to exit. So there's a lot of little things like that go kind of counter to entrepreneurial advice, but is better for selling your business in the next year or so.
A question for you on intellectual property, IP, branding, trademarks, and so forth. How valuable is that? How does that factor in the decision making? And how do you value that?
It's important because it signals something to us buyers. If you have a trademark or branding, I know immediately I'm dealing with a professional. And a lot of times at this size of the market, that's not what we're dealing with. So to see something like that, and the same person's also running through a business bank account and they have business credit cards that don't have personal expenses on there, now I know I'm dealing with a professional and we're starting at a higher level. There's more trust. So having things like intellectual property, trademarks already completed, it's a signal as well as a benefit. So I would kind of double down on things like that. If you're looking to sell, we all know how long those take. That's a good year beforehand that you'd want to at least get that paperwork started.
Just going back to the one comment that you made of presenting yourself as a professional, as a seller of your business. Obviously, you have to have your bookkeeping ducks in a row, but there's a lot of other things that you can do too. Nowadays, there are fractional chief financial officers that could do contract work that you could hire to look at your business as an outsider and provide advice regarding all financial matters of the business so that you can organize things to present your business and yourself in the best possible way, right?
Yeah, and it is. It's a different, I didn't catch on to it for years. And then I realized, I'm looking at businesses very differently than I did before. And I run them very differently than I would have before. I always try and have, if something happens to me, that my wife could sell the business in 30 days. So that means, you need all those SOPs done. You need everything written down as much as you can get out of your head. You need those finances ready to roll. And obviously, you're going to run your business better if you do that. But none of that is any fun because when you're doing it, you feel, hey, I'm not actually contributing to profit here. I'm just kind of going through the legwork. But it really does, over the long term, help. Because you have 2 customers for your business. You have the group that you're selling to on a monthly and annual basis, and you have the person or entity that's going to buy it in the future. And I don't think a lot of people think about that second customer, whether it's me or it's PE firm. That's the one you also have to kind of plan for a little bit.
One of my mentors always say that the more you work in your business, the less it's worth, right? So it's pretty important to have standard operating procedures in place. And as a seller of the business, being able to present to a prospective buyer that you're not actually that involved in the day-to-day operations and spending all your time working in the business, but actually just working on the business and on the growth of the business.
I think I actually just put out a YouTube video about how do you estimate how much time a business is going to take? Because the seller's going to tell you, hey, I work on this for 10 hours a week. All right, so let me, here's what I think that means. And, the expertise that the seller has that can do something in 1 minute that's going to take me 5 hours. Everyone always tries to say it's a little bit less so that the business seems more passive. And you're right, the more you're working in the business, it's harder for me to acquire the business because I know I have to put somebody in there to do that. And a lot of the businesses for sale at this market level, you might be replacing the founding engineer, maybe founding partners. that cost is going to be in there. And you'll see what brokers will do. They'll put an add back in there and they'll say, well, since Joe isn't coming with the business, we're going to add back his salary and that's going to increase profit. Whereas buyers, on the other hand, say, well, we still have to hire somebody to fix it for Joe. And so I'm going to put that right back in there and I'm going to lower the valuation. So this is the dance that goes back and forth. But yeah, it's quite an interesting process kind of as you get through all of these things.
What are some of the most interesting online business niches that you're seeing these days?
That's interesting. I do definitely go back to these VC firms that are now coming up for sale. We're seeing a lot of those on acquire.com. And they're businesses that were built differently than what most entrepreneurs are used to. And so that is something I think I would pay attention to because you're buying a different type of business. The other thing that's probably not surprising, you're starting to see a lot of AI businesses for sale. And so my first thought is, well, none of those businesses are more than, I guess, the longest would be about 18 months. And to me, that just means continuous investment in development. There's nothing that's going to last for 2 weeks after I acquire it. I got to start rebuilding it again. I'm a little hesitant on those. None of them have actually shown that they can stay around long enough. I think they're just kind of a buy and flip opportunity. Not that people shouldn't look at acquiring them, but maybe it's just something to be aware of. But yeah, I've definitely seen both of those have really risen up over the last 6 to 12 months.
This is an extremely interesting niche that's very, very dynamic. And one of the habits I've observed from very wealthy and successful people is they're always studying and learning. What are you studying and learning these days?
Yeah, you're right. You have to touch on a lot of things. So if you enjoy learning different things, this is a really good business to get into. So you're constantly monitoring what's going on in it's kind of a sub-market M&A space, all the changes we talked about with rates and everything. Like many people, I'm teaching myself as much as I can about AI so that I can bring it in as a feature of the business, but maybe not the core part of it. And for me, my weakness is marketing. So I'm always trying to just get better at that. I do outsource a lot of the marketing because it's not my specialty, but it is something I'm interested in learning. So online marketing is going to be always continuously changing. I think we all know that. So if you do like, kind of studying a bunch of different subjects, staying current, these are great businesses to be in.
You'll learn something different with every single business you acquire, right?
It's so neat to see how other people run their business too. I learned so much, even if you just talk to the seller, you do 1 or 2 phone calls, you're going to learn so much. They probably use a tool you've never heard of that you want to now bring into your business. So it's, we do, all of us in this kind of world, right? We all do masterminds and mentoring, but you never really get into that brass tacks of what's really going on in someone's business. When you're looking at acquiring them, you really do learn quite a bit. And for me, it's like getting an MBA just by looking at how other entrepreneurs have set up their businesses and learning things that I just didn't even know to investigate.
You had mentioned earlier in our conversation that your unique ability is taking a business from 1 to 10 million, not necessarily starting it up and getting it to $1 million in gross sales and revenue, but taking it from 1 to 10. What are some of the strategies you implement and execute to accomplish that?
Typically, when I'm looking to acquire a business, again, it's coming maybe from one engineer or maybe a partner group. So the 2 things that really happen there is the business is starting to hit some scalability issues. And that's typically one of the reasons why they want to sell. If you're a true entrepreneur, you really start to lose the love of the business when you start having a lot of customer problems, you start having infrastructure issues, and you realize like this isn't the fun stuff that the sexy fun stuff of me building something new. That's where an operator like me comes along. So I typically have to deal with those challenges where we've hit some scalability issues. So typically if it's a software business, we'll spend the first year really just hands off. Like first, let's not break anything. Let's learn what's going on, find where we're hitting some of these barriers, find where some of our best customers are hitting feature sets that they wish they had. Then we start building that out slowly once we understand the architecture and the infrastructure. And the second thing is really professionalizing the marketing. Buying in for cloud businesses, if it's an engineer that starts it, we're all introverts. We're not super into marketing. There's obviously a whole group that does build in public, and that is a certain type of marketing. But at some point, you kind of have to professionalize that as well. So I always say my first year, it's going to be learning the inside infrastructure, looking at that scalability, and then how do we professionalize the marketing so that we can continue to grow the business. And those of course work together.
Michael, on the show, we talk a lot about a business. We talk a lot about investing, cash flow, but we also talk a lot about living and leaving a legacy. So I always ask my first-time guest if they cannot pass on any money to future generations, but they were only allowed to pass on 3 principles and values to help them achieve success and happiness and build wealth, what would they be?
The first one, because it does flow with this conversation really well, is financial literacy. I feel that we don't teach that really worldwide very well. It is such a leg up to learn that, and you really don't want to learn that stuff on the fly. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you really don't understand how finance works. So financial literacy is the first thing to get your leg up. Second is always keep that eye on what's really important with regard to family. I have a tremendous amount of fun with my businesses. It's the first thing I look at when I see a new business. My first thought is, will I have fun running this? And you can get really wrapped up with that. And a lot of us have this culture where we really enjoy what we're working on. We'll do it for 15 hours a day and not even notice. So for me, it's always been important to make sure I do remember to really put like family time into my calendar, because that's important to me. And that really, as I'm getting older, you might be able to see some gray hair up here. That's where I'm realizing the real return on my investment is from family and friends. And finally, for me, every time someone asks, what was your competitive advantage growing up? I read everything. And I guess you can see the books behind me. I know a lot of consumption of new knowledge is coming, from shorter models, right? From TikTok to Twitter and even essays and newsletters. But there is still a ton of value that I get out of reading books, continuously going back through old ones. And that seems to be where I find the structure for my long-term growth comes from things that are thought out more thoroughly, which is what you're usually going to get in a book. Yep. So for me, and we've heard I think Mark Cuban, right, where he's like, I just read every single thing I could, and I knew when I walked in the room, I knew more than anybody else. If you can walk in with that kind of confidence, it's amazing. But always stressing, read as much as you can, financial literacy, and don't forget the important thing, which is family and friends. And that's the whole reason we're doing this.
Michael, where can my listeners learn more about you and what you do, and where can they follow you, and where can they stay informed of all the many projects that you're involved with in the future?
Yeah, I keep a website. It's at michaelfrew.com. So my last name is spelled F-R-E-W. From there, I've got 2 newsletters. One is for the buy side, trying to help engineers buy and acquire businesses. And one's on the sell side, trying to help people understand what we're looking for when we're selling. I threw up some, this is all free. I threw up some videos of, here's the 4 questions I always get when someone finds out what my career is. And it kind of touches on some of the things you and I talked about, which is how do you finance these? How do I know what business to buy? Who sells a good business? A lot of people don't believe that good businesses are actually for sale. So trying to answer those questions. I put out videos on YouTube, which is just, I think it's Michael_Frew, or just Michael Frew on YouTube. Should be easy since I've got a unique last name. And those 2 are probably the best 2 places. I'm always just trying to put out information of here's what I've learned, here's all the thousands of mistakes I make, and just hopefully kind of continue to grow this space, because it's a great ecosystem, and the more and more people that get into it, I'm just seeing a lot of careers that people didn't realize they wish they could have. So yeah, any of those spots, you can hopefully get some information.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your journey, your knowledge, and all of your insights in this incredibly dynamic space, and sharing all the ins and outs of buying online businesses. Really, really appreciate you coming on.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
And thank you so much to all of my listeners and viewers for, again, spending your most valuable resource, your time, with me on the show. Everything Cashflow Ninja is at cashflowninja.com. Podcasts, books, reports, and webinars, and much, much more. And don't forget to subscribe to the #1 newsletter in the alternative wealth strategy and alternative asset investing world, The Wealth Dojo. We publish it every single week. It gets delivered straight to your inbox. You can subscribe at cashflowninja.com/subscribe. Until next time, live infinitely. This presentation is for educational and informational purposes only. The information being presented and considered does not consider your particular financial objectives or situation,
and it does not make personalized recommendations. This material is not intended to replace the advice of a qualified tax and legal advisor or other qualified professionals, and you should not use the information in place of a customized consultation with a licensed professional regarding your specific personal financial objectives, situation, and needs. We believe the information provided is reliable, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, timeliness, or completeness.